You ever get that feeling? Like the world suddenly goes quiet for a reason? Like something invisible just leaned in close to whisper your name? It's not a coincidence. No, it's not your imagination either. It's that moment when the air feels heavier, the light feels different, and something inside you says, asterisk, pay attention, asterisk. You see, most people scroll through their lives like they do their screens fast, careless, distracted, missing the message that was meant just for them. But sometimes the message doesn't come through signs or symbols. Sometimes it hits straight through your chest like a jolt. It's not loud, but it's undeniable. It's that thought that won't leave your mind, that pull that won't let you rest. It's a direct message delivered in silence, wrapped in timing, meant only for you. Funny how people always expect the truth to come dressed in thunder and lightning. They want it loud, dramatic, impossible to miss. But that's not how real messages arrive. No, the most important ones, those life-shifting, soul-cracking whispers, show up quiet, subtle. They slip into your mind like a shadow in an empty room. You don't even realize it's there until it starts rearranging the furniture inside your head. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it just sits there, waiting for you to notice. Because some messages don't need to be spoken, they're felt. They crawl under your skin, and suddenly, everything around you starts to look different. You ever wonder why certain moments hit you harder than others? Why a stranger's words echo longer than a friend's comfort? Why a random thought at 3 a.m. feels more real than anything anyone's told you in months? That's the thing, messages don't always use sound. Sometimes they use timing. A word, a song, a silence, a loss, it all lines up too perfectly to be random. You call it coincidence because it's easier than admitting something bigger is talking to you. Because if you admit that, you have to face the fact that maybe you were never in control in the first place, and maybe that's what scares people the most. The idea that there's a voice beyond logic, one that speaks in patterns and pauses instead of words. You can't mute it, can't block it, can't scroll past it. It doesn't need permission to reach you. It shows up when it decides you're ready to listen. And here's the catch, you don't get to choose the form it takes. Sometimes it's wrapped in beauty, sometimes in chaos. Sometimes it arrives through love, other times through heartbreak. But it always delivers what you times need, asterisk, not what you times want times. Think about it. How many times did life warn you before the fall? You felt it, didn't you? That uneasy feeling you brushed off, the sudden change in energy you ignored, the small voice that said, something's not right. But you silenced it because you didn't want to face what it meant. You wanted proof, logic, a reason to believe what you already knew deep down. That's the irony. You asked for a sign while standing in the middle of one. The message was there all along. You just didn't like its tone. People think the universe, or whatever they believe in, communicates in grand gestures. Burning bushes, booming skies, miraculous rescues. But the truth is, it's much simpler, much quieter. It speaks through your thoughts, your emotions, your patterns, through the people who enter and leave your life at exactly the right or wrong moment, through that random memory that resurfaces for no reason. Every little nudge, every delayed plan, every door that closed before you were ready, that times was times the message. You were just too busy questioning it to hear it. See, when something's meant for you, it doesn't need a megaphone. It doesn't compete for your attention. It just keeps showing up, over and over, in different disguises, until you stop pretending you don't understand. Because deep down, you always do. The real problem isn't hearing the message, it's accepting it. Because once you do, there's no going back. You can't unhear it, can't unsee it, can't go back to the comfort of not knowing. And maybe that's why most people would rather stay deaf to it. Because listening means changing. Listening means letting go. Listening means trusting something you can't explain. And when you finally do listen, when you stop resisting the pull, everything starts aligning in ways you can't explain. People show up at the right time. Doors open that shouldn't. Obstacles disappear like they were never real. That's how you know you've received the message. It doesn't make life easier, but it makes everything times make sense. Asterisk. You start realizing that every mistake, every delay, every heartbreak was part of the delivery system. That the pain wasn't punishment. It was preparation. You had to lose your balance to learn how to walk with faith instead of fear. So, the next time something stirs inside you, don't ignore it. Don't brush it off as nothing. That thought that keeps returning, that feeling that won't go away, that strange coincidence that repeats, it's not random. It's not madness. It's a message. It's life tapping on your shoulder saying, asterisk, wake up. This part matters. Asterisk, because some messages don't arrive in words, they arrive in realization. And the moment you finally understand, you'll look back and realize it wasn't silence speaking to you after all. It was direction, disguised as quiet. You ever notice how timing works like a trickster? How something can seem meaningless one day, and the next, it hits with the weight of 100 storms. People think messages come neatly, in order, with neon signs and arrows pointing the way. But real messages, they don't follow logic. They hide in the cracks, in the pauses, in the spaces where you least expect them. They wait for the right moment, and when that moment comes, it doesn't warn you. It just arrives, and suddenly everything you ignored before starts making sense. That's how the universe, or whatever force you believe in, communicates. It doesn't chase you, it waits. It doesn't force your eyes open. It nudges your soul until you finally see. Think about the moments you dismissed, the coincidences, the repeated thoughts, the strange feelings that made no sense. The universe was speaking, but you weren't ready to hear it. Timing is brutal that way. It teaches you patience, but not the kind you think. It doesn't reward waiting, it rewards noticing. You can sit idle for years, but if you're blind to the signals, the message will pass right by. And when you finally do see it, it hits harder because the buildup has been quiet, almost invisible, until you can't deny it anymore. That's the brilliance of timing. It trains you to listen, even when the world screams for distraction. People are terrified of being still. They scroll, they talk, thinking movement equals progress, thinking noise equals proof of life. But movement without attention is nothing. The real messages come when you stop, when the world goes quiet, when the chaos fades just enough that you can hear the whisper. That's the moment you realize how often you miss the signs because you refuse to pause, because you refuse to be still. Because stillness is frightening, it shows you what you really feel, what you've been ignoring, what's waiting for you to accept. And that's the thing about messages, they're not convenient. They arrive at the worst times, or maybe the best, depending on how you see it. They break you, or they build you, or sometimes they do both. You can't schedule them, you can't manipulate them. You can only receive them, and even then, only if you're willing to open your eyes. That's why people miss so many of them. They want signs that make sense. They want instructions, wrapped in certainty. But life, or whatever force is sending the message, doesn't give certainty. It gives nudges, timing, patterns. It gives you glimpses that feel incomplete until you look back and realize they were complete all along. Timing also tests you. It wants to see if you'll notice, if you'll respond, if you'll trust when logic says no. It sends signals that feel like coincidence, like deja vu, like luck, just to see if you're paying attention. And the moment you finally do, the moment you stop dismissing, the moment you act without needing proof, the moment you listen, that's when the magic starts to unfold. Everything that felt random, everything that confused you, suddenly aligns. The delays, the losses, the strange detours, they weren't accidents. They were part of the preparation, part of the build-up, part of the perfect timing that finally delivers the message right where it needs to land. People think messages are about the content. What they miss is that the timing times is the point. It's not what you're told, it's when it's told that changes everything. The same words, the same thought, the same feeling delivered too early, and it would be meaningless. Delivered too late, and it might be ignored. But delivered just when your mind and heart are ready, it hits like a revelation. That's why patience matters. Not the kind you brag about, not the kind that looks like waiting, the kind that feels like surviving, the kind that listens, even when nothing seems to happen, the kind that trusts that the right moment will come, and when it does, you won't miss it. And when it finally arrives, you can't ignore it. You can't deny it. It doesn't scream, but it's deafening. It doesn't appear with a sign, but it becomes impossible to miss. That random thought, that sudden understanding, that quiet feeling, you feel it in your chest, in your gut, in the part of you that's always been awake, even when you weren't paying attention. And that's how you know you're hearing a real message. Because timing doesn't lie. It doesn't twist or embellish. It simply waits until you're ready, and then it strikes with the precision of something that's been building in silence, in shadows, in the spaces you thought were empty, until you finally can't look away. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to ignore the little things? The whispers, the nudges, the moments that feel like nothing at all? People brush them off like they're accidental, meaningless, irrelevant. But the truth is, those little things carry weight. They're not loud because they don't have to be. They're subtle because subtlety forces you to times choose, times to notice. Life or whatever force is sending these messages doesn't scream at you. It doesn't give subtitles. It doesn't hand you instructions wrapped in gold. It slips under your skin, moves through your thoughts, and waits. It waits for the moment when you're paying enough attention to catch it, to feel it, to finally respond. Funny how most people think they're listening, but they're really just waiting for something obvious, something dramatic, something that can't be missed. They miss the truth because it doesn't meet their expectations. They're tuned to the wrong frequency, distracted by the noise of the world, by the opinions of others, by their own doubts. And while they're looking for signs that scream, the real message slips past them, silent, deliberate, persistent. It doesn't stop, it doesn't beg. It just waits until you are ready to see what's been there all along. Some messages are delivered in discomfort, a pause in conversation, a strange feeling in your chest, a coincidence that's too precise to ignore. They show up in moments that make you uncomfortable because truth rarely arrives wrapped in comfort. Comfort dulls perception. Pain sharpens it. Confusion forces clarity. When the message arrives disguised as chaos, it demands that you pay attention. It refuses to be passed over. And the longer you ignore it, the more persistent it becomes, because it knows that you have to learn the lesson of noticing before you can understand. And this is the cruel brilliance of these messages. They don't explain themselves until the timing is perfect. They show up incomplete, fragmented, like a puzzle with missing pieces. You look at them and think, asterisk, this makes no sense. Asterisk, asterisk, this doesn't belong. Asterisk, asterisk, this can't be for me. Asterisk. But patience is the filter. Only those who stay present, only those who pay attention, only those who resist the urge to dismiss will eventually see the picture whole. That's how the universe, or whatever, is guiding you, trains you. It tests your focus, your perception, your ability to trust what isn't yet obvious. People are afraid of noticing. They're afraid of what the message might demand, what it might change, what it might expose. They want clarity without risk, understanding without effort. But real messages are dangerous in the right way. They disturb your routine, challenge your comfort, push you to act when you would rather stay still. And when you finally listen, when you finally acknowledge it, that's when everything begins to shift. The obstacles, the delays, the doubts, they begin to align because attention has been paid. The ignored whispers become guidance. The nudges become direction. The coincidences become a map. The interesting part is that once you start noticing, you can't stop. The subtlety becomes addictive. You begin to see patterns in everything. The timing of events, the people who enter and leave, the thoughts that recur. You begin to understand that nothing is random, that the small, seemingly meaningless details were all part of a design waiting for your awareness. And suddenly, life doesn't feel chaotic anymore, it feels deliberate. Even the pain, the setbacks, the disappointments, they all make sense when you understand the messages hidden in them. You start trusting what you can't yet see, relying on what you can't yet explain. And trust isn't simple. It's not easy. It requires you to believe without evidence, to act without certainty, to risk without knowing the outcome. Most people can't handle it. They need proof, guarantees, confirmation. But messages don't work like that. They demand faith. They require that you take the subtle and turn it into action. That you interpret the small as significant, the quiet as urgent, the ordinary as extraordinary. That's how transformation happens, not when everything is loud and obvious, but when you learn to notice what no one else does. So when you feel that tug, that strange thought, that sense that something isn't accidental, don't ignore it, don't dismiss it, don't wait for someone else to tell you it matters. Because life doesn't wait, it doesn't repeat itself. Every unnoticed whisper is a lesson lost. Every ignored signal is a step delayed. The moment you pay attention, the moment you act, the moment you respond, you step into alignment with the truth that was always waiting for you. You stop being passive and start participating. You stop being blind and start seeing. And that's when the real message finally becomes clear. When the invisible becomes visible. When the subtle finally turns into everything you've been searching for. People always underestimate the power of noticing. They walk through life like sleepwalkers, convinced that what they don't see doesn't exist. They scroll past signals, dismiss signs, ignore feelings that tug at their chest, thinking the world is meaningless, random, chaotic. But that's the trap. The truth is in the details, in the whispers, in the pauses that nobody else cares about. Those small things are louder than any scream. Those fleeting thoughts, those moments of deja vu, that strange chill running down your spine. They're all messages, subtle, silent, and precise. But most people miss them because they're not paying attention. It's funny how people crave guidance but fear it at the same time. They want answers, but they only want the ones they can digest. They want signs, but only the flashy, obvious ones, the ones that make sense on paper. The universe, or whatever force delivers the message, doesn't work that way. It sends signals in ways that test you, ways that challenge you, ways that make you question your own perception. The right message doesn't scream, it doesn't beg, it doesn't arrive with guarantees. It arrives in forms you can barely recognize, wrapped in timing that seems inconvenient, disguised as confusion, disguised as coincidence, disguised as something ordinary, until you can't ignore it anymore. Think about the moments when you brushed off that inner voice, that strange feeling, that thought that wouldn't go away. You dismissed it because it made no sense. You laughed it off because it didn't fit your logic. You didn't have proof, so you ignored it. But the moment you ignore the message, the moment you pretend it doesn't exist, it waits. It waits because it knows that timing matters. It knows that preparation matters. It knows that you need to be ready to understand. And the longer you ignore it, the more persistent it becomes. Because the message is not about convenience, it's about awakening. Messages are rarely convenient. They rarely arrive when life is tidy, when emotions are organized, when everything feels comfortable. They come when you're stretched, when you're questioning, when the world feels unsteady. And that's intentional. Comfort dulls perception. Pressure sharpens it. Pain forces clarity. Confusion demands focus. When the message arrives disguised as chaos, it's testing you. Testing whether you will notice, whether you will respond, whether you will trust the invisible. Only those who stay present. Only those who choose awareness over distraction. Only those who dare to see what others miss receive the full message. Most people never notice. They're too distracted by noise, by opinions, by endless chatter, by their own fear of reality. They want magic without work, guidance without attention, signs without commitment. But life doesn't operate on their schedule. It doesn't bend to their comfort. It doesn't wait for them to feel ready. The messages are always there, persistent, deliberate, weaving through moments, people, experiences, coincidences, until you finally see the pattern. And when you do, everything begins to make sense. The delays, the obstacles, the heartbreaks, they were never meaningless. They were preparation, a series of small signals, shaping you for what's coming next. The moment you start noticing, you can't go back. Awareness is addictive, relentless, transformative. Suddenly, you see patterns everywhere, alignments where before there was only chaos. People, events, decisions, they're all part of a larger design, one that has been waiting for your attention. And the interesting part is that you can't force it. You can't make it obvious. You can't demand clarity. You can only pay attention, and in that attention, the message emerges. It doesn't shout, it doesn't force, it doesn't compromise. It simply waits for you to be ready. And when you finally are, it strikes with precision. And the truth is that listening requires more than noticing. It requires action. It requires trust. It requires risk. You don't get the message by sitting idly. You get it by responding, by acting, by choosing to believe in something invisible, something uncertain, something unexplainable. That's the challenge. And that's why most people fail. They want the guidance but refuse the responsibility, the intervention, the courage to follow where the unseen leads. But those who do listen, those who act, those who trust, they step into alignment. They step into clarity. They step into the flow of something greater, something precise, something that has been moving quietly, deliberately, patiently, all along. So, when that feeling rises in your chest, when that thought won't leave your mind, when that coincidence happens again in a way that feels deliberate, don't ignore it. Don't brush it off. Don't wait for someone else to validate it. Because the world doesn't hand out clarity in neat packages. The messages are subtle, persistent, silent. And the moment you finally notice, the moment you act, the moment you respond, you step into the current that has been waiting for you. You stop being passive. You stop being blind. And suddenly, what was invisible all along becomes unavoidable. People always act like messages are obvious, like they should arrive wrapped in neon lights with a drum roll announcing their importance. But that's not how it works. No, the most powerful messages slip through quietly, almost mischievously, hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to notice. You scroll past them, shrug them off, call them coincidence or luck, but they never leave. They linger. They echo in your chest, in your thoughts, in the way your gut twists at nothing, at everything. They don't demand your attention, they lure it. And the moment you finally look up, finally listen, finally feel, everything you thought you understood about timing, about fate, about control, shatters. Think about the way life arranges coincidences. How something that seemed meaningless yesterday suddenly makes perfect sense today. That text, that stranger, that small decision, you barely registered. Everything lines up like it was orchestrated, like the invisible hand finally got tired of waiting. Most people miss it because they're too distracted. They're too busy checking notifications, too busy scrolling past the very signs that are meant to stop them. They're too afraid to be still, to notice, to admit that maybe there's more going on than what their eyes can see. And yet, the message keeps coming, persistent, patient, unrelenting, waiting for the moment when you can no longer pretend it isn't there. It's funny how messages are often disguised as discomfort. A sudden pause in a conversation, a chill down your spine, a thought that repeats itself until it becomes unbearable. Life doesn't bother to dress the truth in comfort. It wraps it in unease, in tension, in patterns that demand attention. People ignore it, rationalize it, push it away, because truth rarely comes in a convenient package. And the longer you ignore it, the more insistent it becomes. The whispers grow louder in the silence, the nudges sharper in the pauses, the coincidences undeniable. Because messages, real messages, aren't flexible. They don't negotiate. They are precise, deliberate, and they are not meant to be missed. People say timing is everything. They don't realize that timing isn't just about luck or opportunity. Timing is preparation. Timing is the way the universe tests your awareness, your focus, your ability to see the invisible. Messages don't arrive when you feel ready. They arrive when you've been prepared, when the cracks in your life have made you susceptible, when the chaos has sharpened your perception enough to understand. That's why the ones who notice are few. Most people are too impatient, too distracted, too unwilling to wait for subtlety. They want the message packaged, labeled, explained. But subtlety isn't optional. It's essential. It filters out the unready. leaving only those who are paying attention, only those who are willing to act when clarity finally arrives. And notice this, the moment you finally pay attention, it changes everything. You start seeing patterns where you thought there was randomness. You begin understanding the hidden meaning behind delays, the lessons inside setbacks, the signs that were always there but ignored. You realize that nothing is coincidental, that every person, every event, every strange thought was part of a design meant for you to notice when you were ready. And suddenly, life isn't chaotic anymore. It feels deliberate, purposeful, orchestrated. Pain, disappointment, confusion, all of it begins to make sense because it was never meaningless. It was the message preparing you, nudging you, forcing you awake. But here's the tricky part. Messages aren't just to be noticed. They demand action. They require that you move when logic says stay, that you trust when doubt screams, that you risk when safety whispers. That's why most people never get the full impact of the message. They see it, maybe, but they don't respond. They wait for confirmation, for explanation, for validation from someone else. But the truth doesn't wait for approval. The message exists whether you notice or not, whether you act or not. And the ones who succeed, who transform, who rise, they are the ones who finally listen and respond, without hesitation, without excuses, without fear. And when you do respond, when you finally open your eyes, finally trust your instincts, finally act on what you feel, everything starts to align. Obstacles fall away. Delays make sense. Doors open that were invisible before. That's how you know it's real, because the moment you notice and act, life itself shifts. It's subtle, yes, but undeniable. It's quiet, yes, but powerful. It doesn't demand acknowledgement. It simply rewards those who dared to notice, to listen, to trust the invisible thread, connecting them to something bigger, something deliberate, something inevitable. So, the next time you feel that tug, that thought that won't go away, that strange moment that feels deliberate, don't dismiss it. Don't rationalize it away. Don't wait for someone else to explain it. That's the message. It's subtle, relentless, unavoidable if you choose to see it. And the moment you finally do, the moment you finally act, the moment you finally listen, you step into a current that has been waiting for you. Silently, patiently, deliberately, all along.